Hey friends, welcome back to Mixing Up Success. I'm Dani, and today I'm doing something a little different. No guests, no tutorial, no business strategy breakdown, just me and a conversation I've been needing to have. For the last few weeks, I have been in a season of research, listening to podcasts, reading articles, having real conversations with business owners and with friends and with people in my community here in Hood River, all around one topic that I think every single one of us is navigating right now, whether we want to or not. And that's AI. And I'm here to share my honest confession to start. I felt the pressure to have an opinion about AI before I actually had one. Everyone has a hot take. Everyone has a strategy. Everyone is either all in, it seems like, or deeply skeptical, and they'll tell you exactly why in about 30 seconds. And I noticed that I was starting to form my own opinion from other people's opinions, and that felt wrong to me, and that felt dishonest. So I stopped and I did the work and I figured out what I actually believe. I'm calling this episode The Farmer, the Baker, and the Algorithm because that's what I am. I'm married to a fourth generation pear farmer. I run a cookie and baking business with my own two hands, and I've been wrestling with what this technology means for people like us. People who work close to the land and close to the craft. What I'm sharing today is where I stand for now. I want to be clear about that. I am not done thinking. This is a living framework, but I've landed somewhere real and I want to share it with you because I think a lot of you are in the same place I was a few weeks ago, feeling the pressure to have a strategy before you even have a stance. So let's start with the stance. I'll share mine. I've spent some time researching. It really began probably a year and a half ago when I started exposing myself to different tools, trying different things, figuring out how AI could really help me as a small business owner. And I really felt the pressure to be utilizing AI as a strategy about a year and a half ago when I felt like if I didn't get on board with these things, I was going to start falling rapidly behind. So I started doing research and figuring out what tools I liked, what tools were available, and I can't even begin to touch the surface of how many tools are available to small business owners. But I went after the main ones like ChatGTP and Claude and a few other smaller things. And I started really just using them and trying to figure out how to use them, what to use them for, how to make sure I was not losing my own self and business within them. And I found that there were weeks where I really leaned into them, and there were times where I really didn't use them at all or kind of almost forgot they existed. I began conversations with other business owners about what they were doing, how they were using things. I started paying attention to different groups and networks and hearing conversations about how people were using things and what they were doing with things and what tools were available that people were trying. And I invested in things and tried. I continued to have conversations specifically with farmers and makers, teachers, all sorts of people that were being exposed to these things and how they were fitting into their own life. I really focused on having conversations with people that work with their hands and trying to understand where this technology fits in the future, or what does it look like. I really thought a lot about how does AI play out in the farm aspect, because for years there's been tons and tons of research around how to mechanically harvest and take the labor components out of farming. And it feels like we're still a long ways away from that reality, but things are moving so fast that it's hard to say. I asked a lot of different questions and also started asking about, what is the risk for humans? Not just the job, but human capacities, and where does that lead us? So that led me really those conversations, the research, my own trial and error led me to a question that started unlocking everything. We've all had experiences of knowing something before we can explain it. And I lean so heavily into this in teaching cooking and baking classes because I believe you have to get your hands in the dough to fully understand the process and what you're trying to achieve. And I believe strongly in in-person teaching and making sure that if I'm teaching a pie dough class, every student is making a pie dough, has their hands fully in the dough, and is feeling the textures. And we're talking about the texture. We're talking about how to work with the dough, how to handle the dough, how to not overwork the dough. And there's just something in that situation that you really can't put into words. It's these feelings, this knowing before you cognitively realize what you know. And that's not magic. That is really your nervous system doing incredibly sophisticated work that your cognitive mind doesn't even realize is happening. So your body's really taking notes about your entire life and everything around you, every interaction, hard conversations. There's so many things that your body is collecting that we can't cognitively explain how we know what we know, or at least that's what I feel like. So when I think of that and I start thinking about AI, well, I realize that we are just feeding as much information, as much cognitive information that we can into these machines. I'm questioning what we don't know how to even feed it. Or let me say that in a better way. When you feel something or when you have a conversation with somebody and they react in a way, you adjust and you carry it forward in your body. And when I'm having a conversation with AI, that is not happening. There's not a mutual reading of the situation. It's not a true conversation. It's feeding me back information. And I have to be extra diligent about making sure I'm asking deeper questions, having it contradict me, having the machine push me to think differently about things versus if I have a conversation with a person, they think very differently, they act very differently, and it definitely feeds into how the conversation plays out. So ultimately, my take is that AI literally has no skin in the game. Obviously, it has a lot of information and it can be very useful, but it really doesn't have the gut instinct that the human experience or that a human can embody. It doesn't have that relational instinct to read people or rooms or energy or trust, which in my mind, none of that is statistical. And all of it really matters deeply. So when I look at all of this, I took my thoughts and I put them into 4 different pillars as I think about AI and my stance on AI. I believe that AI is a tool and not authority. I believe that as a small business owner, it is absolutely something that can help me keep up with an ever-changing and a fast-paced world. But I equate it to a tool like a hammer, and a hammer doesn't decide what gets built. The person holding it does. I think that AI can help guide how you think about things based on statistical information that it carries. But ultimately, as humans, we have to be the decision makers. And I do think that there's some risk when we start outsourcing the deciding on the judgment, the values, or the direction that we're going. I believe that it's a great tool in my business and it can work and interact in many ways. And I use AI tools every day. There's no question about that. I use Canva and I use AI tools in Canva. I use Claude. I use ChatGPT. I use QuickBooks. I use MiniChat. I use Google. All of these I am constantly fine tuning and working together to become more efficient and ultimately have an AI assistant that helps me keep pace with the fast, ever changing world that we live in. But none of these tools make my business less than Dani's Kitchen Shop. The cookies are still all of mine, they're handcrafted. The classes are still all based on my cooking and baking experience and my relationship to the actual product, the feel, the touch, the smell, all of the other senses that come along with baking and cooking. And I think when we start leaning heavily into using AI, we start to question, am I still the author of this work? And I think we have to be careful because depending on how we use it, that could be yes or no. And I have tried very, very, very heavily to make sure that I remain the author of all of my work. And when that is my foundation, I feel like I can use it freely. And given that I've been using tools for, pretty consistently for about a year and a half, I have definitely learned how important it is to take the time to set things up, to make sure that my voice is captured, to make sure that it aligns with how I speak and how I talk and how I communicate my messaging. I encourage you that if you think, oh, yeah, I've been using AI, but am I truly the author of this work? And you say yes, I think you should use it freely. You have built systems, you have checks and balances to make sure it's really you. But if you're not sure, maybe it's time to slow down and make sure that it's a good representation and you are truly the author of the work that you're putting out. AI is really seductive and it generates language that pulls you in and makes you feel good and continues to use it. And I think we have to be careful with that because we need to make sure that we aren't overlooking things or underthinking things. We need to continually ask questions and have critical thinking skills. And so I share that because I think it's really important to keep in the back of your mind as you're using this as a tool. And ultimately, you have to stay in the decision or the deciding mode when using AI. So you have to decide what's true, what's right, what's worth making, what needs adjusting, and not just use maybe the first output of something. Really make sure you're asking questions and becoming the deciding factor. So for pillar 1, tool, not authority, I came to this conclusion. So when I think about AI as a tool, and I do use it, I want to be clear about that. I come back to this question every single time. Am I still the author of this work? Is my judgment driving this? Are my values shaping this? Is my voice still in it? If the answer is yes, I use it freely. It saves me time. It extends what I can do, and it lets me show up better for my students and my customers. But the moment I feel myself outsourcing the deciding, the judgment about what's right, what's true, what's worth making, that's when I need to slow down because fluent output is not the same as wisdom. And I work too hard to build my voice to hand it to an algorithm. The tool serves you. You don't serve the tool. And that's pillar 1. The second pillar that I've touched on is really about the somatic intelligence and it being absolutely irreplaceable. So, somatic means the body, and this is where humans have something that I believe AI will just never have. And I think about this a lot because I work with my hands every day, either on the farm or in the bakery. And royal icing is really a great example. So many people have taken courses from me or reached out wanting to learn to decorate cookies. And royal icing is one of those things that is really about consistency and making sure you get it right for you. Every single person can work with a different consistency depending on how fast they work, how strong their hands are, how detailed they are. There's so many things that are out of my control in helping somebody learn to decorate cookies. And really, royal icing, I mean, I held off for years even trying to teach it because I really think it comes down to figuring out, well, one, find a good recipe and figure out how to make it. But when it comes to decorating, every person kind of has to figure out their consistencies. So there are ways to measure consistencies, right? Where you can measure with seconds and you can set a timer, and it has to do with how the peaks, when you pull a peak, how it falls back in. But again, there's a lot of room for error in that. So that's a really, really challenging measurement tool to teach people because most people, how big of a peak did you pull? Did you set a timer or did you just count in your head? There's so many factors that make it something that when you feel it, you know it. And so I mix a big batch of royal icing and then we hand mix every color because we only need certain amounts of every color for different cookies. And in that hand mixing process, after years of hand mixing icing, there is just a feel when you're mixing for a certain consistency that you just know. And when I started teaching Mercedes, my lead baker, how to make icing for me, to try to shift that off of my workload, there was definitely learning curve because I could explain the time measurement and I could set up a lot of different things to try to help her generate the consistency that I needed. But the reality is, it just took years of doing it. It took repetition and feeling the icing and figuring out how to do it. And I'm going to be honest, Mercedes has been doing the bulk of our icing now for about 2 years, and she's better at it than me. I've lost a little bit of my touch by not doing it every single day like she is. And so sometimes when I take on the icing for a big cookie week, it shows. It shows that my consistency just isn't quite right. And those are just micro adjustments that you make without thinking. And that's what I'm talking about with somatic intelligence and it really being irreplaceable. I want to share one more example that I had this week about somatic intelligence. And that was I was testing some cookie recipes. I'm trying to dial in some drop cookies, a new product line for the summer. Just we're going to be we shift our model to being a little more open regularly once a week. And I want some new product offerings to share with my community. And I have been rolling around in my mind what I want to offer for months. And I've been playing around with different recipes, trying a few different things, playing with flavors and textures. And I have this vision of what I want in my head for this drop cookie. And I explained it to somebody the other day that I was like, I want a chocolate chip cookie that is available every Friday in the summertime, and you come and you get one and you can't stop thinking about it. So then the next week you come back and the next week you come back because it's so memorable and delicious that all you can think about is, I got to go to Danny's and get a cookie on Friday. So I've had this in my mind. I'm a baker. I've baked for years and years and years, and I have good cookie recipes. I have so many I could lean on. And there's a part of me that's like, they're just not good enough. They're not good enough. There's something that's just not right. And so I've played with some recipes and they've been good. It's hard to not make a good chocolate chip cookie. But I finally got to this point where I really was like, I have to stop overthinking this and just go with my gut. And I did that this week. Took the foundational pieces that I knew I needed in a recipe. So, I have this vision of this large, super thick chocolate chip cookie that is chewy and delicious. And, there's a few foundational pieces that I know I need, which is I know I need additional egg yolk to accomplish this texture. And, I need the foundational pieces of a chocolate chip cookie. I need your flour. I need my leavening agent. I need a solid, flavorful chocolate. I need brown sugar and probably a little bit of granulated sugar. And it's like the simplest ingredients, and there's millions of chocolate chip cookie recipes. I just stopped thinking about it. And I just started with the thought process of what I was trying to accomplish and a basic recipe where I tweaked it to make sure I had the extra egg yolk, and I upgraded the chocolate component a little bit. And then I made the dough. And I added a few things to get the texture because I knew it was the texture that I was after to get the shape that was going to hold the way I wanted it to. And I did it. I shared it with a few people and a few people close to me, and they all came back with, I can't stop thinking about that cookie. That was the most amazing chocolate chip cookie. And that's something that I share with you because I just feel like sometimes we know more than we can cognitively explain, and we just need to go with our gut. So when I think about AI, and I think about my pillars. One of my pillars is somatic intelligence is irreplaceable. Here's what I want you to hear in this. You know with your hands, in your gut, and your body, that is not a lesser kind of knowing. It is not something you need to apologize for or translate into data to make it valid. It is the result of years of showing up, making things, feeling outcomes, adjusting, and showing up again. It has been shaped by love and hard lessons and thousands of batches and real human relationships, and it's not statistical. And all of that matters. And it cannot be uploaded. It cannot be prompted. It can only be lived. And that's your edge. You have to protect it, honor it, and keep making things with your hands, even when you don't have to. Because the day you stop using that intelligence is the day you start losing it. And we cannot afford to lose it. The next pillar that I came to is vigilance protects the work. And this one's hard. I struggle with it. And honestly, this is the one that I think is going to be the hardest for many of us. It's about intentional practice and protecting your capacity to do the work without AI. And this isn't out of fear, but it's simply out of respect for the skill or the craft. And I have found weeks where I lean into using tools, and it's like my muscles, just like in running. I spend a lot of time running. You take 2 or 3 weeks off, and it's like starting over again, right? Like I work up to running 10 miles. I take a few weeks off because I'm like, that was a lot of work. I deserve this time off. Week 3 of taking off, I come back to my running and I go to run 3 miles and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm dying. That's what I'm talking about when I talk about staying vigilant in your craft and your skill. It's really making sure you're working the muscles so that you know how to do the work. Because if everything disappeared tomorrow, are you still going to be able to write those emails? Are you still going to have the skill to keep moving forward? I want to stay the maker and not just the producer in this world. So that leads me to pillar 3. Vigilance protects the work. I think about my kids watching me work. Otto and Winnie see me in the kitchen. They see me figure things out, make mistakes, try again. That process, that struggle, that iteration, the embodied learning, that's what I want them to inherit. Not a perfectly optimized output. I want them to have the process. And I think about my students. When someone comes into my kitchen for a class, they're not just learning a technique, they're learning how to learn with their hands. They're building a relationship between their brain and their body that will serve them for years. That only happens if I keep doing the hard work myself, if I stay the maker and not the producer. Not just the producer. So, my commitment and my challenge to you is this: do something the hard way this week on purpose, not because it's more efficient, because you need the reps, because the skill lives in the doing, and because the world needs humans who can actually do things, not just humans who can prompt things. Stay in your body, stay in your craft. That's pillar 3. The final pillar that I came to was ecological accountability is non-negotiable. And this is where I put my farmer hat on and I think about the massive water consumption for cooling systems. I think about the physical land print of data centers and what that means for agriculture and rural land use. I think of the strain on the local water tables, the power grids, and the community infrastructure. As a farmer, we are dependent on climate to grow food to feed the world. So, a bad frost season or a drought year or a shifted bloom cycle, that's a big consequence in the food system. Pear trees don't care about quarterly earnings. And those are the kinds of things I think about when I think about who's building, why are we building, what is the point of AI, and what are some of the impacts that we're going to face. What are my kids going to face? I'm not anti-technology. I use technology every single day, but I do question how much I find myself saying, do I need that right now or can I just do it myself? So it's a pillar that I want to keep in the back of my mind as I think about AI and the tension there is on humanity and the impacts on humanity. I want to be careful here because I'm not a scientist and I'm not a policy expert, but I am a farmer's wife. And I live in a valley where water and weather and soil health are not abstract concepts. They are our livelihood and they are potentially my children's future. And when I think about AI data centers, at what they actually consume, the water, the energy, the land. And I think about who bears that cost and who captures the benefit. I stop and question. I can't set it aside and just talk about productivity without having this on my mind. The people building this infrastructure seem to largely be insulated from the consequences, and the people living in these communities and farming in these communities are not. I'm not saying don't use the technology. I'm saying ask the questions, demand the accountability, hold the space for the reality that progress that destroys the systems life depends on is actually not progress. That's my farmer talking, and I don't apologize for it. So that's where I stand. 4 pillars. A tool, when used ethically and wisely somatic intelligence as something irreplaceable and worth protecting, vigilance as an active practice, and ecological accountability as non negotiable. I came to this from my own research, my own conversations, my own experience working with my hands and living on the land, and my own experience using AI technology. It's mine, and I share it not because I think you should adopt it, but because I think you deserve to have your own. If you're a small business owner feeling the pressure to have an AI strategy before you've even figured out what you believe about AI, I encourage you to start here. Start with the stance. The strategy will follow. I would genuinely love to know where you land on this. Send me a direct message on Instagram or Facebook at Dani's Kitchen Shop and just tell me, where do you stand? What question are you still sitting with? I am definitely not done thinking about this, and I'd love to keep thinking alongside you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for doing the real work of building a business and a life that actually fits you. It's not a small thing. It's a radical and beautiful thing. Until next time.